Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very unique Circle of Success Masterclass. As you know, we're gathered here today to learn how to write never-ending control copy and how to get paid royalties for the next decade. And the person teaching you is Marcella Allison. My name is Denise, and I'm jumping in here for Barb today, and I couldn't be happier to jump because I have a great affection for Marcella. Not only is she a remarkable human being in her own right and in her own life and in her own personal family, but as a copywriter, she is extraordinary, both the copy that she creates and the copy that she helps others create. And she has a deep personal interest in helping people succeed. So I feel especially grateful to be sitting in on this masterclass. For those of you who may not know Marcella as I do, I'm happy to introduce you. She's an A-list copywriter. You've heard that term. She's worked with some of the biggest top direct response companies in our industry. She's written for The Motley Fool, Bottom Line, Advanced Bionutritionals, Money Map Press, Metabolic Living, the Bo Eason Group, and many more. Marcella's copy has generated over $100 million in sales for financial trading services, alternative health, and information products. 3 unique niches, over $100 million. Yes, that's what I said. In 2018, we wisely awarded Marcella the Copywriter of the Year award for her outstanding performance record. Marcella is also the founder of Titanides Mentoring Collective. You can find that on a link that we'll provide for you in the chat. Titanize is an organization dedicated to promoting female entrepreneurs, marketers, and copywriters. Marcella is also the author or co-author of a book called Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This Before?, which is a collection of wit and wisdom for and by women in this wonderful business of ours. With that, Marcella, it's my true pleasure to turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Denise, for that lovely introduction. So I'm going to just begin sharing the story behind this never-ending control with you all. I want you to focus on a few things today as we're going through this. So one is think about how you keep generating more and more ideas, often for the same product, right? So how can you keep that constant stream of ideas going? So look for that today, right? Because every time we're faced with a new project, one of our biggest challenges is to come up with a big idea. But as many of my mentors taught me, the first one that comes to your mind is usually not your best. And sometimes you're blessed that you have 5 or 6, all of which would be good. And then you're trying to figure out which one should you go with, what should you test. So today, pay attention a little bit as we're going through to what is the idea generation process here and how can you use that in any of the assignments that you're doing or work that you're doing for clients. The second thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is how I set this up to become an unending stream of royalties. And we tend to get attached to that and we think that means, you know, I must get 2% of every sale to make this work. But there are a million ways to skin a cat, to use a bad metaphor. And there's lots of ways to keep getting paid to refresh copy, even if it's not a standard royalty agreement. And in my 20-some years, I've done them all. So don't feel like, oh, I don't do royalty projects, this doesn't apply to me. When I first started out as a copywriter, I would write for Schaefer's Investment Research for the same trading service over and over again, and I just charged a refresh fee. I would just change the first couple pages to keep the promotion going, and I charged hourly, and I did very well doing that, right? Because Bernie was never going to pay royalties. You know, the world would freeze before Bernie paid royalties, and I made just as much money over time that way. So don't get stuck in this box of thinking this only applies if you're some big gun writing for Money Map Press and you're commanding 3% royalties. Not the case. And we can answer questions about that if you like, kind of how that game is played and how I set that up. Okay. The other thing that I want you to, so I want you to look for ideas for how to keep something new, and I want you to focus on how you can keep the money chain going. Okay, so the other thing I want to tell you is this is a direct mail package, but this applies if you're doing it online. There's very little actually that we change in these promotions. They just go online as a long sales letter or a video, and you just don't have sidebars and things like that. But don't focus too much on the fact that this is printed paper, right? Because it also, there's a version of every single one of these. Almost all of them, I think, went online also, and one was even animated, right? So just focus on the words. Don't worry about whether it's online or not, because these packages actually are both. I want to give you just a little number before we kick off. So this was one of the first projects I wrote when I had started working with Paris Lampropoulos as an apprentice, studying under him as a copywriter. He's one of the godfathers, right? He trained with Clayton Makepeace, who I know many of you know here. And then he trained me. So Clayton used to call me his granddaughter. It was very cute. I don't think Wendy was too happy about that. So this was one of the first packages I wrote for him. It was over 12 years ago. It took a lot of copy chiefing on his part. I had 1 million drafts on the first version. Then after that, it's about 16, 20 pages. After that, I only changed the first 2 or 3 pages. I kept refreshing it with new ideas that I had come up with. And I added it up, and Soundview is a smaller mailer. So they're not sending millions of packages out in the mail. They're a smaller mailer, but I added it all up. I figure over the whole course of this, we probably sold about $10 million worth of this supplement. My part of that was around 162,000 paid over this time period. That works out to about $1,300 a month. And if you live in Cincinnati, Ohio, like I do, that paid my mortgage for 13 years. So that's the power, right, of keeping something alive. You're going to put a ton of time and focus and energy and effort into getting your first piece of copy ready. If it works, why wouldn't you go back to that same client and say, hey, can I keep this going for you? Can I try something else? And again, if you're getting royalties, often they just assume you'll do that because you're going to get keeping that royalty stream going to you. If you're not getting royalties, then charge a flat fee for it, which is something that I did often. And I'm just going to give you one caution, which is the land of refreshes can get swampy. So if you write a piece of copy and it does very well, any piece of copy, right, for a client, and you go back to them and you say, hey, how about if I refresh this for you so that you can keep it going longer? Make sure you're really clear about the boundaries, right? I had a situation where someone was like, that's terrific. Oh, we love it. And I refreshed it and they came back and they're like, oh, but we changed the spokesperson and we changed the price. Oh, and we want to swap out the track record and update, but I was like, okay, guys, you've changed about everything in this package, but or for. Therefore, this was not a refresh. This is a new package. And here's what that fee would be. So you just need to make sure you're defining it when you're doing this. But marketers love this, right? Because they know how long it takes to generate something from scratch. And if you can do it quickly and keep it going, they're your best friends, right? And it helps them keep revenues going even as they're trying to maybe test something new. All righty. So let's start by, I'm going to try my share screen here. We'll have a drum roll, see if I can pull this off. Okay. So when I was asked to do this project, this is Kim Schwalm. I want to give you this headline because when you are not the first person to launch a thing, then you're going to be going up against a thing that already exists, right? I know that's obvious, right? Duh, right? Okay, when you're going up against a piece of copy that already exists, this seems obvious, but you want to know, is it working or not? And is it working gangbusters or is it just okay? Then you want to study that existing piece of copy to see what you can learn from it so that you don't repeat the mistakes. And they're not even mistakes, like they learned something when they tested that idea. So you want to learn that from them. You don't want to make the same guess about your target audience when you're going out. You want to learn what they learned. And the other thing is that your audience is always learning and changing. So this product is called Pectosol Detox. It's a oral chelation product. It is an amazing product, which I 100% believe in. In fact, it was tested on children in China who suffer from high lead levels because it's one of the only things that's gentle enough and safe enough to remove the lead from their bodies. So Kim launched it. I came along afterwards, right? But in the 12 years that I held this, somewhere between, I think this is 13, so I think I'm hitting 13 now. What people knew about detox, what they believed about the need to detox your body, what people knew about toxins. Can you think of what we knew about toxins a decade ago versus what we know about toxins now? Just think of the fact that Flint, Michigan happened in this time frame. Okay, so they changed and grew. So my headlines, my ideas had to change and grow with the audience over this time period. Because if you're going to keep something alive for 10 years, you're going to have to evolve with your market. Okay, so I am called in and told that I'm going to go up against a control that Kim Schwalm has launched, and she had already tested several ideas of hers. So I said, send me everything you've got and tell me how it worked. So before I show you what I did, I thought I would just start out and show you what Kim did and what I learned from that. Okay, so here's Kim's first headline that she did. Beyond oral chelation, introducing a safe new way to rid your body of dangerous heavy metals and toxins. The only chelator of its kind shown to work in human clinical trials. Now, a couple of things about this. Clayton Makepeace, who I know we all know and love, and I hope you guys all have the AWAI products from him because he's amazing. Clayton had just had a massive control. In fact, I think it may be in one of the products that you get for chelation, oral chelation. So that was this idea of chelation was in the conversation, and she knew it was working very successfully, right, for other marketers in the space. So she put this pre-hit on oral, beyond oral chelation, right? And then she has introducing a safe new way to rid your body of dangerous heavy metals and toxins. And then she has a proof element, right? The only one of its kind shown to work in human clinical trials. Now, the thing that's interesting here is she is going after people who know they have this problem, right? If I don't know that I have heavy metals and toxins in my body and I don't know they're a problem, this headline wouldn't speak to me, right? But when you're launching a new thing, one of the easiest low-hanging fruits to go after are the people who already know of the problem and know they need the solution. And if you want to go way deep into this whole concept, you can read Breakthrough Advertising, right, and break that down. But just know that's going to be your target audience, right? If I'm in the desert and I'm desperate for water, all you got to do is put up a sign that says water. You don't have to convince me it's the best water, it has electrolytes. I don't care. I just need water, right? Okay, so that's what she did. She went right after the folks who were the most likely to buy this, who were already worried about toxins. Okay, next one. Now she's grabbed all those folks. So she's got to go broader the next time, right? So now she's thinking, okay, how can I connect this new thing they might not be as aware of? Because remember, 13 years ago, toxins wasn't all in the headlines, with something they already know about. So this one is a beautiful example of taking something that people cared a lot about, memory, and connecting it to this new thing she wants to tell them, toxins, right? And she's put those two together, right? And Kim told me later that this one wasn't one of her strongest ones, that it did okay, but it tired very quickly. At the time they asked me to write a package, this was her headline, and I thought it was brilliant, right? You always, like you get the job and they go, yeah, this is what we have now. We'd love for you to beat it. And you're like, right? I needed a shot of whiskey. Okay. Her headline, what toothpaste, cereal, and your morning newspaper have to do with your miserable joint problems. Now she's cast an even wider net. There's no mention of toxins in the headline. She's calling me in with curiosity, and she's linking it to one of the most read, popular conditions, right? Arthritis, right? So we say joint problems in the supplement world. There's all kinds of legal rules that you have to know about when you write for this industry. Okay, so you say joint problems. That's code for arthritis. So she's got curiosity, and this is a huge net. Can people drop into the chat how many people use toothpaste, ate cereal, or read a newspaper this morning, right? And the funny thing is, of course, this was old school newspaper, right? Now we read them online, right? But do you see how that's calling out a huge group of people, right? It would be hard to say no to any of that. Okay, that's when Kim calls me in. So this is my challenge. All right, so let me stop sharing here. Okay. Any questions just on that before we go? Let's just pause for 2 seconds, and then I'm going to start to roll through my strategy for going up against that.
Absolutely. I don't see any questions yet. Christopher said he did 2 of the 3 this morning, so it's right there with you.
All right, you've got it. Now you're going to need Pectosol, Christopher. I hate to tell you. Okay, so there is a great comment by Gary Bensavenga, which I love, which is he's the first one who said, if you're going to go after a control, right, if you're going to go after a huge control, one of the ways you can do it is to change the format. Now, this is risky, right, because there's a risk associated with testing a new format. But I knew that Kim had this really strong control. So one idea in the back of my head is, is there a format test I could try here? So that's something to keep in mind, and I'm going to show you the format that I tested. But remember, 2 of the biggest breakthroughs in our industry came from format tests. So the first, which you probably know, is the Magalog. In other words, there used to be short 4 or 5 page sales letter. Think of the Wall Street Journal 2 Young Men sales letters. And then they became things that looked like a book. It looks like a 32 page magazine, right? That was called the Magalog, right? And that transformed everything. And now everyone went to this long copy that looked like a magazine issue. Think about the video sales letter. Again, you used to just have a PowerPoint slide, right? Before that, it was just a long Word doc that you would, turn into a sales letter online. Now we watch 60-minute videos that look like Breaking Bad. Those are all format changes, right? And then they became the standard, all right? So in the back of my mind, I have, is there anything I could do here related to format that would be interesting? The second thing that I want to tell you is when you're working on a project, you need to be aware of everything that is going on in your environment around you. And at the time I was working on this, I actually got an EPA notice in my mailbox, one of those like really scary warning notices in my mailbox. And I'll tell you how that comes into play. So when I start working on this project, I start to do research, right? You're always going to begin with research. You never want to assume that you are the target audience, because no matter how much you love and identify with the product, you're a one rabbit study, and you never want to be a one rabbit study. So you want to go talk to lots of people. And today it's so much easier because you can read stuff online. You can go to Reddit boards. You can post a question on Quora. Like, you can go so many places online to engage with people who are your target audience and start a conversation with them. I work with a young man at Money Map Press who was writing for a women's menopause product, who went into these spaces like on Reddit and posed as if he was a woman in menopause and asked for advice. And by the end, he totally could write in that voice. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, right? So I go to do my research, and I went to a friend of mine who is an energy healer, who's very aware of toxins. She was very worried about health. She was very interested in alternative health. She read a lot of similar publications to the ones that I wrote for. And so I'm all excited. I go to her and I'm like convinced she's going to be terrified of toxins. And I'm like, aren't you worried about? And I'm rattling stuff off like plastic and water bottles and mercury and fish. And I'm just getting on a roll. And she keeps going, no, I don't eat fish. No, I drink out of glasses. Like, everything I say, she had an answer to. She's like, no. Really what she was saying is, I'm a health nut and I've already taken care of that. Then she said something that lit up in color. A friend of mine said that the other day, and I thought, what a great description of when you get a big idea. It lit up in color. She said, do you know what I'm really worried about? And I said, no, what are you really worried about? She goes, all the stuff that is still inside of me from when I was growing up. She had lived on the East Coast, near some industrial sites. Both her parents were smokers. They still sprayed DDT. When I was growing up, they still sprayed DDT at night in our neighborhoods to kill mosquitoes, right? She goes, that's the stuff I'm worried about. So at that point, my brain goes ding, 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 ding. This is a great way into the package. So I go online and I do a bunch of research and I find something that's called a body burden study. And 11 years ago, this was a brand new concept. It was the first time the United States had ever done this. They had taken a bunch of individuals and taken their blood and measured the level of like I think in the beginning, the first one had less than 100 toxins. Now I think they measure over 300. They didn't connect it to anything. They literally just wanted to know how are chemicals building up in our bodies. Okay, so that sends me to the environmental working group because they were part of the study. And then on the environmental working group site, I find a study they did in Europe that shows it was on 3 generations of women. And it showed, I want you guys to guess. So let's guess. They tested children, mothers, and grandmothers. Who do you think had the most toxins in their body? Lay it on me. Okay. So just type in the chat, children, mothers, or grandmothers.
I see 3 responses, and they're all children so far. Everyone's saying children. 1 grandmothers.
2 grandmothers. Who had the grandmothers? Ooh, Christopher. All right, you're the winner. It was the grandmothers, and you know why? They had all the toxins that I just listed that Julie was worried about, like DDT derivatives and PCBs and everything that were around when I grew up, and all the new ones. So they were the generation that was the most contaminated, right? And it turns out that that was the age of our audience. So do you see how now this research that I'm doing, plus talking to people, then going back for more research, having this thing light up in color, oh, it's the grandmother, begins to come together when I'm like, now that's a powerful idea. So Marty at Boardroom used to say, that makes me vibrate. Okay, now I left you hanging off the cliff where I said I'm going to tell you how the idea of a format test comes into this. Okay, so I just finished discovering this about the grandparents, and I get an envelope in the mail that is from the EPA. It turns out, this is sort of disgusting, but it turns out that my neighborhood had a bunch of septic tanks and people weren't maintaining them. So the contamination was quite literal, and the warning from the EPA said, if you people don't deal with this, you're going to be forced to put in sewers, which they did, which, trust me, was a good idea. So let me show you how all this comes together now. So I'm going to share screen. Share. Okay, so let me close Kim's. This is what I design as an envelope. I just took that notice from the EPA and turned it into a fake notice, if you will, from the publisher. This is the address of Advanced Bionutritionals, the maker of the supplement. And this, right, notice of possible contamination. And I just made that up, people, right? You know how legal notices have a barcode on them, right? And would you open that? So just tell me in the chat, right? Would you open that? If you got that in your mailbox, would you open that? It's scary, right? You're like, oh my God, what am I contaminated with, right? Okay, here is what the headline looked like. This is how I take the study and what I learned from Julie. Important notice, if you were born in the US between 1912 and 1946, which is the ages of the women tested, you may have been exposed to this deadly toxin. Now, they have multiple toxins in their body, but I'm starting with a single one because the power of one, right? This deadly toxin. How to know if you've been affected and what you must do now to get relief, right? So then I just say, if you're between the ages of 58 and 92, new research shows you may have been contaminated with a deadly toxin. And you guys are going to get this whole package. So you can read it through, you can study it, you can see how the opening goes. The thing I want you to notice is how this is very clean. I wanted it to look like a legal notice. I don't have any pictures. There's almost no design other than I made it very readable, and most legal notices are about 2-point type and you can't see yourself, right? This, if you're going to do a gimmick, if you will, test, everything has to be consistent. So I can't open that scary notice of an envelope and then have something that looks like bright and shiny, like, Oprah magazine. That would be a disconnect, right? So I'm keeping everything consistent. So this was a very successful launch, one of the most successful they had for this product. And that's how I got the control from Kim. So now, how do I keep it going? So one of the things I want you to think about is the point at which you have just finished doing all of this research is the point at which you're going to have the most ideas for the product. So what you want to do is keep a whole list. I picked this one, but I had about 12 ideas for how we might approach this. Okay. So some of those ideas become sidebars, and I don't think I have, and I don't think this one's in here, but let's see. Yes. Okay. So one of the studies that I found when I was down in my rabbit hole research that came from that body burden study was that a group of scientists wondered, could there be a connection between the epidemic of diabetes in the United States and the epidemic of toxins? Here's where I have to have the official disclaimer. I am not a doctor. I do not play a doctor on TV. I am not giving you medical advice. Okay. So these guys looked at that research, and these scientists said, I wonder if there's a connection, because the line of diabetes in the US went like this, and the line of toxins went like this. So a person, one of these scientists, just ran the data. And what he discovered was that in the body burden, in those people that they had marked, measured the blood, those who had the highest levels of the 6 most common persistent organic pollutants were 38 times more likely to have diabetes. So you can't explain that away as a coincidence, right? And when I read that, it lit up, right? I had a holy shit moment, pardon my French, right? So I was like, that could be a good opening too. But here's the thing, at the time, nobody had successfully launched a supplement for blood sugar, which is again code for diabetes. So I didn't want to take too much of a risk. So I put it in a sidebar. All right. Next thing that happens after I launch the first one and it starts to get tired, the next thing that happens is the fabulous Richard Armstrong, another great speaker at AWAI and one of my favorite people in the world, launched the sugar solution in 2007. It became a New York Times bestseller. He wrote the copy for it, and it put diabetes on the map. Now, all of a sudden, we were all like, oh, we can do headlines that focus on blood sugar problems. So the next control that I did took that sidebar and turned it into a package. Blood sugar problems, the culprit might be the 6 common toxins found in most homes and what to do about it. Do you see I've taken a lesson from Kim's playbook here, right? Remember where she called out chelation and said, here's how to get rid of toxins? I'm calling out people who know they have a blood sugar problem. And I'm telling them, hey, did you know that actually it could be caused by these toxins? Right? The brilliant thing that Paris added, which I love, is found in most homes, right? Because if I say blood sugar problems could be caused by these toxins, but they're found in waste dumps, then I'm going to go, well, I don't live near a waste dump, right? Found in most homes was just a stroke of genius. That's why you get a good copy chief, right? Because those 3 words, right, made a big difference. Okay, so this then became so successful that they actually would sort of put this in the rotation. And Carlene Anglade-Cole, another fabulous AWAI mentor and teacher, talks about this, how if you can give your client multiple headlines, then you're always in the mail because they'll just keep swapping them out. And if you're in the online world, again, it means they can run different ads. They can place different copy in different places, right? That means that you're getting more money if you're making royalties on it. Okay, so this then becomes a very strong control, runs for a long time. And the lesson here is your next headline is probably hidden in your current package. Now, it might not be as clear as that sidebar, right, of mine, which was really obvious, right? But there are themes, right? There's something on page 6 that you could bring forward and develop that might actually make another good test. And the best time to keep track of these is when you do your research the first time. So I already had a Word document where I was just dumping other ideas. And of course, one of them was, hey, see if that blood sugar thing couldn't become a good headline for you. Okay, so when you're doing this, capture everything on the cutting room floor, right? And put that in a separate document called Ideas to Test, right? Okay, now the next thing that you know, in the beginning, I talked to you about, and trust me, I would never attempt to teach breakthrough advertising. You got to read that and study that thing on your own. And it ain't easy, right? You're going to need some Excedrin. But one of the things you're testing is, what does the audience know and believe about the product I'm writing for? And that is always in motion, right? So one of the most famous tests of what does the audience know and believe about what I'm doing was done again by Gary Bencivenga, right? This is study the greats. You know this when you're in AWAI. You guys know to study the greats. So one of the tests he did is called the case against. Has anybody heard that phrase? The case against? Just drop a yes in the chat. Gary Bencivenga launched Whitaker's Health and Healing, and that was the first alternative health publication. And when he launched it, the idea of alternative health was brand new. Right now, it's like the mainstream, right? It was brand new, and he had run that package for a really long time with headlines that were calling out for people who were interested in alternative health and healing. And eventually he got to the point where he was like, maybe everybody already knows about this now. So he goes out with the case against alternative health and healing. And you see how the case against will both get people who believe that it is important, right? Because I want to argue with you. And it might also get people on the other side. But it's a great way to test. Has everyone already heard this? And are they having an, yeah, so what moment? Because if you do the case against, then I'm going to get up in your face and I'm going to defend that, right? So let me show you how this plays out with something. So I decide maybe people already know everything there is to know about toxins. Maybe it's time to go against that, right? So I test all of these designs. By the way, I just have to say this, are done by the fabulous Lori Haller. The case against detoxing, why detoxing can actually make your body more toxic, plus what to do instead to rid your body of pesticides, heavy metals, and other dangerous chemicals. Now, what's interesting here is that you've still got to make the turn, right? So you're starting with the case against, but you guys know I'm about to sell you a detox supplement. So how do I do that? The classic way of doing that is to say everybody else is wrong. Okay, that there's something about the way they're doing it or their product or their setup that's wrong, right? And that's the argument against, and then why yours is the better way to do it. So just to help you understand, right? What happened with this is Nan, who was the expert at the time, we actually changed experts over the course of this, Nan Fuchs told me that in women who took like an extreme detox diet, that many of them would get really sick because toxins are often stored in fat tissue, which means they're stored in women's breast tissue. And when they would lose weight, if they would lose a lot of fat quickly, the fat would release all those toxins into their bloodstream and they would get really sick. But this supplement actually, it's sort of like a Chinese finger trap. It's made up of citrus pectin, modified citrus pectin, which is that white stuff on the underside of an orange, and algae, right? Like alginates from the sea. And it makes like one of those, this probably isn't politically correct, but those Chinese finger traps where you put your fingers in as a kid, remember, and you try to pull it out and you couldn't. That's what it does, but it puts the toxins inside and it's incredibly gentle and it just circulates in your blood. So now I had a perfect way to set this up and make the turn, right? So you can see how I did that, right? You've probably heard, now I'm going with what they think they know. You probably heard detoxing is good for you. You've heard it can remove all these heavy metals. You've heard it supports your body in these great ways. But here's something you should know. It can actually make your body more toxic. It can actually make you sicker. And then I say, that's right. And then I tell them about this being stored in your tissues. And then I say, when you release them, they're going to go in your bloodstream, and they're going to go to your brain, and they're going to go to your heart, and they're going to cause all these troubles, right? This is really bad, right? And then I say, right, but that doesn't have to happen to you, right? So when you do that, right, then you are immediately setting up your product as the hero. And here's something that I think is great. You don't want to sound too self-serving. So when I say the good news is there's a safer way to do this, I don't start with my product. I say, well, you could use colonics, you could use saunas, those are kind of expensive. That's why I was so excited when I found this product, right? Because you don't want to seem too self-serving. So that's how you test. Are they jaded? Do they know everything there is to know about toxins? And for some of you, because we talk about this a lot, and then I'll pause and take some questions here. So Gary Bencivenga had the case against. That's 3 words. I'm using his exact 3 words, the case against, right? So is that plagiarism? Am I stealing, right? There used to be a rule of thumb that one of my mentors taught me, which was probably more than 4 words, right, is pushing the envelope. But if it's something like, there was another famous package, lies, 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 right? You could swap and apply that to tons of industries, even though that headline was used in financial, right? So I'm not using the case against for the same product. I'm using it for a detox product. I have a whole different case against. This is not the case against alternative healing. This is the case against detoxing. And I'm only using 3 words, which it's hard to argue that's taking someone's whole headline. So that's about using your swipe file ethically, right, in a way that that respects both the person who came up with the headline and what you're doing it. So I've used just those 3 words, the case against. And that's, I use that a lot. I've tested it in a lot of different industries when I'm trying to figure out, are they jaded? Well, it turns out they weren't. Actually, this did not do very well. It turned out that actually they were still very engaged in knowing about detoxing, right? So then I kind of changed my approach. So I did this test. I'm like, nope, I shouldn't go down that path. Now let's go back to teaching people about toxins. Clearly, they're not jaded and they don't know everything that there is to know. So let me pause for just 2 seconds and ask if anyone has any questions or anything they want to ask before I go on to the next controls.
Great. You do have a couple in here for you, Marcella.
Lay it on me.
Someone wants to confirm the name of the author. Is it Gary Bencivenga?
Oh, Gary Bencivenga is an amazing copywriter. And if you Google Gary Bencivenga's bullets, they're still available on the internet. Denise, help me out. Is it B-E-N? Here, let me see if I can find out. And we can put it in the chat. Bencivenga.
Yep.
And I believe if you just Google Bencivenga bullets, right, you can find them. And someone else said, what do I mean by control? A control means that the piece of copy you wrote for that product, that website, became successful enough that it's the one that stays, that they're using. Does that make sense? So the control means mine beat Kim's, so they stopped mailing Kim's at that point and started mailing mine, and then mine will stay the one they mail until someone picks me off. So when you start a project, whatever is there is in a sense the control. If they've never sold that before, you're going to be the first one because you're going to be the one to launch it. And unless it's an absolute failure and they take it down immediately, which it won't be because you're all in COS, then you stay the control until they replace it with something that performs better.
Fran, should I put the link for Bencivenga bullets in the Q&A or in the chat?
In the chat, and it looks like Victoria found it for us, so I'll move it over there.
All right, honey, I got
Thank
it too.
Completely free, great. I have them all printed out. You guys can't see because it's in the bottom half of my bookshelves. I have a binder this big with everything I could get. And he does, it was a newsletter. He didn't do it, I think he only did it a couple of years, but they still live out there. God love the internet, right? So just go grab them and read them. And you'll get some of these same lessons, right? And as you can tell, I try to give credit to the mentors, to the people who came before me, to where I learned these lessons, because as new copywriters, that's how you get better, is just like we do in COS. You're studying and you're learning, right, from everyone who came before you. So I try to give credit, and it also gives you another resource of another place to go for learning. Okay.
And I put a link to the archives, which is a great list of his books.
Yes, fantastic.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
I did see one more at the moment. Was the use of age planned to force an update every year?
Oh, that's interesting. No. It was this. So the audience itself, you guys know to do this, right? You want to ask, what is the age of your target audience? So most of these people were between, say, 60 and 80 on this list, right? Old enough to have health concerns, maybe 50 and 80, I would say, old enough to have health concerns and be taking supplements and be worried about things like arthritis and memory problems. In other words, me. So it just worked out perfectly. If it had been the grandkids in that study who were the most contaminated, I couldn't have used it. It wouldn't have made a good headline. But because that study had the age that matched exactly with the age of my audience, that worked. Now, because the study was done at a moment in time, the headline didn't change, right? But you're right, when we refreshed it maybe 8 years later, we tested it again because I had tested out of it with all these ones that you're seeing. We did adjust the birth years because in terms of being factually correct, those birth years just had to match the ages of the people in the study because that was my proof. Does that make sense? So it wasn't deliberate, right? And you're right, I did have to refresh it later to match up again because 10 years had passed. Okay. Are we good to go on? Should we go to the next one?
Yeah, we have a couple more questions. I'll save them for you.
Well, keep going. No, that's good. That's good. Because like I said, they're going to get all of this in their report. So let's answer questions while we got them.
Great. Thanks, Marcella. The next question is, when you're beginning to work on a new project, how much time would you expect to allocate to research?
Oh my God. Whatever you think you need, double it. Here's the thing about research. I was just talking to Sam Woods about this the other day, a young man that I mentor. You're going to find one fact, right? So I get this idea, oh, this body burden thing is interesting. Then that sends me to environmental working group. Then that sends me to the one where the scientists like do the comparison between the persistent pollutants and people with diabetes. Then that sends me, right? Like, here's the thing. You don't know what's going to light up, right? So you have to, let me think about this. Okay, in the beginning, have fun, go down the rabbit hole. Give yourself, give yourself 3 days, 4 days. I am going to just start reading everything I can find about toxins. I'm going to Google everything under the sun. I'm going to just let my mind fly from here to here to here to here. And whenever I find something that's interesting that I go, like when I read that thing about 38 times more likely if you had those 6 common pollutants, I had that moment, right? The Oprah aha moment. I immediately cut and pasted that into my research doc. But that day there might have been 10 other things that were sort of boring, not interesting. There was a ton of stuff about toxins in breast milk. My audience hasn't been breastfeeding for 3 decades. I didn't use any of those. There was some about lipstick. I thought, oh, that might be helpful, but I wasn't really sure because that would eliminate half my audience because I got dudes too. So I kind of put that, I was like, I'm not going to go down the lipstick rabbit hole, right? Other things, I remember going completely down this rabbit hole for Teflon, which then became the movie, right? And scared the crap out of myself and then realized that my supplement doesn't remove it, right? It removes pesticides because they have a specific shape that matches in that lock. Didn't get Teflon. So I was like, well, there goes that. So the first day, first 3 or 4 days, you're going to just go everywhere. Then I want you to start to narrow it. So as soon as I started to connect that idea of body burden to what was going on with Julie, to that story about her childhood, then the next couple days, I'm only looking for body burden studies, studies about generations being more contaminated, studies about what toxins would have been around in the 40s and 50s, right? That leads me to lead and gasoline. Like, now I'm going deliberately to find a thing I need. At that point, you need to cut yourself off and start writing. When you have enough that you have your big idea, you have your facts, you're going to start writing. Then as you're writing, you're going to hit a thing where you're like, wow, I need a proof point here. I can't say that and not prove it, right? Then you go out and you just search for that fact that you need. And sometimes you won't get exactly it, but you'll get close. So then you'll shift your copy to adjust for the proof that you do have. Does that make sense? Did that answer the question? I can't see the Q&A, but did that make sense? Was that helpful?
Let's see. I'll see if they've posted a follow-up in here.
So really, you're going to need more time than you think. You're going to need more time than you think. That's the short answer. But you don't want to spend 3 weeks randomly going down the rabbit hole. You want to give yourself some time to do that, because that's where you'll find the fascinating bits. Then you want to start to narrow it once you see the things that light you up. Jed Canty, Denise has a great presentation, doesn't he, about his research process that that is in one of the boot camps.
Yes, he does, Marcel. It is one of the financial
Watch that one.
Yeah.
Watch that one. And it doesn't just apply to financial, right? He talks about how he starts reading news articles and then how he goes further and further and further to get that interesting way in. So do you see how the study about those women and that generation became the interesting way in? Jed Canty, Jedd Canty, and it is probably the 2016 or 2017 boot camp recordings, and it's all on research, and I couldn't recommend it enough. He was one of my chiefs at Money Map Press. Absolutely brilliant. Also a fellow copywriter of the year. Absolutely brilliant. Okay. Do we have any more?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
The next one for you. If you have a headline like "The Case Against Detoxing," and you notice that people still care about detoxing, so the package doesn't work so well at the time, would you just run it again later?
Yes, that is a great question. So you're trying, who was it who came up with the jump the shark moment, right? From Evel Knievel. It's not exactly a perfect metaphor, but you're trying to find, when has their knowledge shifted so the headline has to change to keep up with their knowledge? This is one of the most depressing thoughts that I will give you about this package. It turns out that the amount of toxins in our environment and the amount of stories that keep coming out meant that I never jumped the shark. The case against has not worked, and instead what has worked is every time there's another headline story about toxins, I have a new control. And it's not that I don't think I'm brilliant, but I have to give some percentage of my success is due to the fact that this package traced the evolution of our awareness of toxins so that I could keep talking about more and more dangerous things in our environment and our body, and our understanding of what those toxins do to your body also evolved. So I could keep adding studies that were like really grim, like, if you put these 3 common toxins in your body, your reactions go up, a 10x factor because they start feeding off each other. I mean, so I never got to the point where people were jaded or were like, yeah, I already know that's bad and yeah, I don't care. I just haven't got there yet. And it's more a product of the world than my brilliance, if that makes sense. Any more before we jump into some more?
Let's see. No other questions at the moment.
No. Okay.
Let's press on.
Let's press on. Okay. So what am I going to do next, right? Remember when I said to you, keep a list of ideas. So now I go to my list of ideas. This is the next one on my list of ideas, and this actually came from Paris Lampropoulos, my mentor. So Paris had written a package for Balsh in the 90s called You Eat Right, You Take Supplements, yet you still, his was You Take Vitamins. I think he wrote, he said You Eat Right, You Take Vitamins, yet you still feel lousy. So he had used a version of this. So it was his. Remember that. He had used a version of this in a sidebar in a package for a book about vitamins like 7 years before. So when we were brainstorming all of our ideas, and remember I had that cutting room floor list, he said, hey, let me just throw this out at you, right? This, you eat right, you take supplements, yet you still feel lousy. What if we took out vitamins and we put in supplements? That could be something to test. And again, because it's his headline, right, and a different product, and the book was no longer mailing, so lots of reasons why I could use this. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. So once I went through the first 3 I had, I said, okay, let's test this one, right? So we test this one. Didn't work. So I was like, okay, I need another one. So I go back to my list, and Paris again says, hey, I got another one for you. He says, remember the famous Joe Carbo ad, Lazy Man's Way to Riches? What if we try a lazy man headline, right? So again, just like the case against the lazy way. And here's another idea when you're trying to brainstorm. So the lazy man's way to riches had been a big control in, what do we call that? Biz op, right, Denise? The biz op space.
Yes.
I'm in the health space, right? So I want to say it's, who is it who always talks in his talk at AWAI about how his best headlines? Oh, Bob Bly, the brilliant Bob Bly says half my headlines for his sort of nerdy science, whatever clients, right? His like geeky clients come from health or biz op. And he just, right? So this is a biz op headline, the lazy man's way to riches. That's Joe Carbo. It becomes the lazy way to vibrant health. That's another great way to spark ideas for a test. Unfortunately, this one did not work either. So I'm like, all right, phew, back to the drawing board, right? So now this one was one of my all-time favorites. So there is let me stop share for a minute. There is a great, and again, this is a free resource. So the Gary Halbert newsletters are still available, just like you can get the Gary Bencivenga bullets. You can get the Gary Halbert newsletters. And there is a hysterical one that is written by John Carlton, who's spoken many times at AWAI, who writes a guest newsletter for Gary Halbert, where he says, if you're going to write for chicks, you better read everything. And he basically tells the dudes they should go read Oprah magazine, right? And it reads slightly sexist today, but it's very funny, right? So he says you should go read everything. And so that I get in the habit of trying to read all these common and popular magazines, and I read Oprah magazine, and I'm literally standing in line at the grocery store and I'm flipping through Oprah while I'm waiting to check out. Before you needed masks and before we all ordered things delivered to our house, you went to these places called grocery stores and you actually put things in your own cart, right? So I am reading this, and I literally see this article. So Oprah had a little health column. It's like at the very bottom of the page. It was about a book she had just read, and the title is Slow Death by Rubber Duck. I'm like, again, things show up in color. I'm like, that is hysterical. What is this? And I go to read the article, right? It turns out it was a review of a book also called Slow Death by Rubber Duck. These guys, it was like 3 or 4 guys, and this is all that was in the little article. So it talks about how these 3 guys want to test how we're being affected by these toxins in our environment. So exactly the thing that I'm trying to prove in my package. So they do what every new college kid would do. They get a new apartment with new carpet, with new paint. They buy a new shower curtain, a new skillet, a new spatula, and they move in. Just like you would to a new apartment when you're, in your 20s. They move in, and this is particularly frightening for all of us trapped in new apartments during COVID. Okay, so they move in and they just start measuring, just like the body burn people, they start measuring the levels of all these things in their blood, like flame retardant chemicals and plastics, and right, they're just measuring every day what's going up. And this was the part that got me, and this was in the article. One guy gets so freaked out just watching this go up, and they're just there during the day. He goes back home to his family at night. They're just like living there during the day doing this experiment. He gets so freaked out that his wife finds him in her basement washing his clothes over and over again, like that scene from Silkwood, even though he knows in his mind it's not in his clothes, right? But he's so freaked out about the numbers. She finds him like freaked out washing his clothes over and over again. And I'm like, that is a brilliant opening. And here's a little secret. Book titles are not copyrightable. So I could actually use Slow Death by Rubber Duck as the headline because a book title is not copyrightable. So I use Slow Death by Rubber Duck. And here's the best thing. My client had a huge argument with me about this. Actually, not my client, my copy chief. He wanted to try, he felt like this was too risky, right? Because like, really, Slow Death by Rubber Duck, like it's curious, but it doesn't really have a benefit, right? It doesn't meet all our rules that we learn in COS. So he wanted bombshell from top scientists. Your home may be more toxic than a waste dump. Simple way to fix the problem without throwing out everything you own. And I had such a visceral reaction to Slow Death by Rubber Duck that I argued for this one. I said, look, this got me to read it. It's what made me read the magazine. I found it fascinating. I really want to test this one. And I said, I get, what my chief is saying, but I really want to test this one. And it turned out that the owner of the company had the same reaction to the Slow Death by Rubber Duck as I did. So we did a split test. And Slow Death, oh, nope. I'm not going to tell you. Everybody guess. Say put duck or toxic home. Rubber duck or toxic home. Let's take a quick and dirty poll. I don't know how many people we have on here, but it's quick and dirty poll.
We've got 50 people. 50 people. So Fran will give you a rough.
Quick and dirty.
I see only duck. Only ducks.
Ah! You people are too smart.
No, you were about to give it away, honey.
I got a sophisticated audience here, Denise. I'm telling you. It is Slow Death by Rubber Duck. And that package became one of the best ones that I had over this time period and ran over and over again. And I've got to do just a little bit of bragging on the fabulous Lori Haller. She made one twist to the cover. See that duck? See how the little ducky's nose leads you right into that first sentence? Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I loved it. I loved it. So this one ran for a really long time. So pay attention to popular culture. Remember to look for books on Amazon. I know I've heard this at AWAI before, but I can't say who first taught it to me. One of the best things you can do when you get a new project is go search for the books on that topic on Amazon. For one, you're going to get a lot of headline ideas. Now, I'm not saying that you should use a book title verbatim. This was just so good. Although I have to say, my mentor kept saying, well, what about Slow Death by something that makes sense? So we had Slow Death by Spatula, Slow Death by Sofa, Slow Death by Skillet. And finally I was like, could we just please do Rubber Duck? And that's what we ended up doing. So
plus it plays into the bathtub and kids and everything. No, it's brilliant.
Right. So, so you should go on Amazon and write down all those book titles and start playing with them. Right? See if that sparks ideas. You should read the reviews because those are your target audience telling you about that, right? And you want to look for best-selling ones. But even when I'm trolling for ideas and trying to percolate things in my brain, I'll just look at all the books, even if only 2 people in Peoria bought it, right? At least there's a headline. It might be interesting. I'll write it down and play with it, right? So, that's another place to go for ideas, are book titles. And I will also say this, the person who asked the research question earlier, 2 of my most recent controls came from, they were in the tech area, so they're financial. They came from books that I found by reading, it was probably The Hustle, which is a great, if you write for tech or anything complicated, sign up for The Hustle. It's free. It's funny. It's engaging. It is the best example you could ever have of how to write in conversational tone about a complex topic. Okay, so I read this article in The Hustle. It sends me to a new book that's just been published on a topic that I can't tell you because the package launches next week. I used that book for 90% of the research, right? And I remember hearing Mike Palmer give a talk at AWAI at least 10 years ago. Might have been when he did that Rothschild's control. Remember, Denise, about gold, and he used a book for that. And even the control that we study, the End of America control, he said, I get a lot of my research from books, and nobody reads books anymore. He's like, it's a competitive advantage. I go get the book and I read the book. So don't underestimate ordering a book. And I will say, if you're doing like what I was doing, tech, it has to be current. And it turned out that this book was the first to be published on this cutting edge topic by a guy who's a leading authority in the field. So bingo, I was done, right? If it'd been 10 years old, it probably wouldn't have been useful for me. But if you're writing about health, it doesn't change as fast as tech or finance. So you might be able to find a really great book. When I wrote about chlorella, I found a really great book on chlorella, the miracle something, and I got a lot of data from that, far more than I found on the internet, actually. So again, books. The next place you're going to go for ideas, we'll do a couple more and then we'll just pause. And like I said, you guys are going to get all these. You can study them. I want you to notice how every time I'm just changing the first 3 pages. The whole back half of this thing is staying the same. So what might feel to you right now like I'm writing the great American novel, 3 pages, sometimes 1 page, sometimes a page and a half. And this thing is going and going and going. And remember, I'm getting $1,300 every month, because this thing is still mailing and mailing and mailing. Okay, so the next place you should go to ideas is read everything your guru or your spokesperson writes. Right? I mean, we live in an online world. This is so much easier. I feel like I'm doing that thing, Denise, where you say you walked uphill in the snow both ways. When I started out, people didn't have blogs. They didn't all publish books. They didn't write on their, forums. They didn't. There was nothing, right? You guys live in an age when your spokesperson, your guru, probably has written a blog, appeared on a stage, done a TED Talk. Go through all that stuff. You're going to find gems of ideas. Plus, they're in that person's voice. And I will totally admit that some of my best packages came from something the spokesperson or the guru wrote someplace else, in a newsletter, in a blog, in a post. All I did was turn it into the headline, and they thought I was a genius. They were like, oh my God, you totally got my voice. This is fantastic, right? I'm like, dude, you said it in your TED Talk. I just cut and pasted and put it in 24-point type. But I'm so glad that you think I'm a genius. Okay, so at this point, I do that. I do that with a story that Nan publishes. And I only changed 1 word in this headline. So, do your favorite foods contain fire retardants? Her headline was, this was an article in her newsletter. So I just read her newsletter. The article said, do your favorite lunch foods contain fire retardants? Anyone want to guess why I took the word lunch out? I don't know if we use raise your hands here or how we do this.
Sure thing. It looks like people are writing into the chat.
Okay, read me off a couple.
Kathy says it's a wider market.
Cast a wider net. Brilliant.
Keith says foods alone is more powerful.
Right? Because if I say how many people ate lunch food today, I personally skipped lunch because I was getting ready for this. So I have, juice, that's it, right? But how many people ate food today? It's like the newspaper, the toothpaste, right? Everybody ate food today, right? But I didn't specify lunch foods. So it sounds like you guys are, once again, you're all ahead of me. Okay, so I just took her article in her newsletter, turned it into a new opening, because this is about fire retardants, talked about my supplement, and then made the turn. I think these are a whole bunch of different test headlines. Okay, so I made the turn right here. So this is where I picked up from my other package. And that's not the only dangerous toxin found in your whatever, right? How are all these ending up in our food supply? This line This was a fact that I had found in my research that lit me up. Every day, a whopping 42 pounds of chemicals are manufactured or brought into the U.S. That's enough toxins to fill 623 tanker trucks in a line that could straddle the globe 3 times. This is where the old version picked up. So you can see I literally did 1 page of copy. And when you look at the size of that headline, right, we're talking maybe 8.5 by 11 page of copy to take her newsletter and turn it into a new test. And this is a great example. This is a little mini copy lesson here, and you guys will see this in the PDF, right? If I just said 42 billion pounds of chemicals are manufactured or brought into the U.S., that is I cannot picture that. I don't know how much 42 billion pounds of chemicals are, right? It's too big. But if I say 623,000 tanker trucks in a line going around the earth 3 times. Did you guys now picture like being on a highway and seeing tanker trucks lined up? And then did you think about the size of the earth? And did you think about 3 times around the earth? And now are you like, oh my God, that's a lot of chemicals. Every day, right? You're like, every day? Okay, so I've just proven to you visually that you're swimming in a sea of toxins in a new and interesting way that made you grasp it with specifics. And I will give full credit to Mike Ward for teaching me how to do that, because every time I would have a big number, he would say, I don't know what that means. And later, as I began to refresh this package, I carried that lesson with me. So for example, we talked about lead in water and the effects on your body, right? And at one point I remember saying, you know, this much lead in a swimming pool of water causes all these bad things to happen. And I was like, do you know how much that is? It would fit on the head of a pin. So now you're like, oh my God, that tiny amount in a swimming pool still causes all these problems. So you got to dimensionalize numbers. Don't just say a big number. Okay. I know we're going to wrap up at 4:30, right, Denise?
Yes.
Okay, so why don't we, I think this is a good place to pause, and then I'll teach a couple more quick lessons here that I like. I've got to teach the David Deutsch death test. It's one of my favorite, and one more format I'll show you. But let's just pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions, and then I can roll through those quickly.
Great. I do see one question here for you so far.
Lay it on me.
After the 1.5 to 2 page refresh, is the proof and compatibility the same as well as the close?
Yes, I didn't. So there's sort of an art to merging it in, but the second half of this package is basically there's all these bad toxins in your body. They're causing all this havoc. I have this miracle solution. Here's how it works. And you can get your bottle to test today. So all I'm doing on the front end of this thing, because of how it's set up, is naming one villain first, then that paragraph that says, but that's not the only bad thing in your body, and then I move into the rest. So it was a great setup to be able to just keep replacing that. Now, if you were writing a financial promo about a stock that's about to take off and the whole thing is teasing that company, there's no way you could do that, right? That you would have to gut the whole thing. But when I'm working on a project from the beginning, I often think about this. Is there a way to engineer this thing so that I can keep it alive? So I'll give you a quick example with that single stock tease that I just told you. I've shifted lately, we'll see if it works because it's going out, and some other writers have too, to doing a big idea package around an opportunity and giving 4 or 5 stock picks that I describe in short sections. Because then if anything happens to one of those picks, I can swap it out as long as my big idea is still carrying the package. I'll give you an example. Years and years and years ago, Mike Ward and I did a package together for BRICS, you know, Brazil, India, China. I can't even remember what the other BRICS are. Anyway, it was about international investing. And so we basically had tons of research in the beginning about how this was going to be the biggest, opportunity. And this, we called them the new breed of gold chips taking over the world. And we told stories and talked about how big this was. The back half teased some specific ones, Embraer and Cemex and some others. But the front half was just about this big idea about how these international stocks were now bigger than the stocks on the Dow. And so I could then refresh or swap out those back parts as long as my big idea still held together. Does that, so it's not always going to work, but if you get creative, you might be able to engineer it in a way that it's easier to refresh.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next one for you. How did you arrive at the conversion to trucks around the world, etc.?
So this is a hard game to play, but I found good old Google. If you type, how big is 10 billion, right? Somebody will say it would, so I think I had the gallons, and I think I said, how much does that fill? And then I figured out how many tanker trucks that was, and then what's the circumference of the globe, and then how big is a tanker truck? So it's sort of like a math problem, like when you're a kid, right? Sometimes a good reporter will already have done this for you. So it has been so long that I can't tell you whether I did the math on this one. I did the math on the lead in the bathtub. I did all that and figured out, did it fit on the pin and how much and how many. I was Googling how much water fits in the typical bathtub. And I was like, how much water fits in the typical swimming pool? Like I was actually putting it together. This one may have come from Environmental Working Group. But the quick and dirty thing is, how much is X will sometimes just give you a metaphor that somebody's used, a breakdown, or you literally have to do 8th grade math. Okay, so how much is a gallon? How much parts per billion is how much parts per gallon? That's what I had to do with lead, right? Because it was like a formula for in your blood, right? So either do Google, you'll get lucky, or 8th grade math. We good?
We are good. Thank you.
Okay, so let me pick a few because I want to leave time for just some final questions. Okay, so let me show you a couple of my favorites. So the next one we went to, we'll do real quick. This is another case against test. And this is Mel Martin came up with a famous formula, right, wrong, right? But I've twisted it a little, right? So you take a thing they know and then you tell them, you're wrong. Or in my case, I said, don't be so sure. I wanted to be a little softer. PBA-free plastics are safe. Again, this was Julie. Julie's like, I already know about that. I only use PBA-free bottles. So when I saw the study that showed that the chemical manufacturers had replaced PBA with PBS and that it was actually more dangerous to your body, I knew, that lit up for me, right? I'm like, oh my God, that's a great piece of research that I have to use. And so I used that, right, to do this headline. And this one did so well that it was used over and over again. I think this one actually kicked off the slow death by rubber duck. And we would just come back to this one over and over again because everyone thought that they were safe with PBA-free plastics. And the other thing that helped me with this, so I say, you have something intriguing, compelling, if I find myself wanting to tell my mother. So I found myself saying to my mom, Mom, don't touch those receipts that you get when you are at the grocery store. If you're having trouble signing a receipt, because everybody's had that experience where the pen won't work because it's slippery, that's BPS and it's absorbed through your skin. So what I found my mom saying this, and then I'm telling my mom this, and then I found myself telling waitresses in diners to try not to handle the receipts so much. They thought I was insane. That's when I knew I had something, right? Because I was telling it as a story, right? So this was a test of something they assumed. It's a little twist, right? They think they're doing something smart. Mel Martin's formula was right, wrong. I went a little softer. I said, don't be so sure. Here's what you need to know. So if you were sort of a smug, satisfied person who believed you were avoiding PBA by using a Nalgene water bottle, you're going to read this. So it's a little bit like a case against, and it was another test of the audience. So even though the audience was still learning tons of stuff about toxins, and as long as I came up with other really scary, awful things to use in the lead, I could keep talking about toxins. This became a really great control because I went after something they thought they already knew, which is that BPA was bad and they were already protecting themselves. And then it turned out they weren't. Okay. The next one I want to show you. So at this point, I felt like I was stuck in a rut. I felt like I was rewriting the same kind of idea over and over again. And I wanted to get a lift and I needed help. And this is why groups like Circle of Success are so critical to your development as a writer. So I reached out to a friend of mine, David Deutsch, who's also spoken at AWAI, I believe 2 years ago. You can find his talk.
Yep.
Great mentor and great copy chief and coach. We swap all the time. So I had this whole headline I was writing about arsenic, and I had written it kind of the same way. I was like, so, there's this bad thing in your body. It was a study I found. I was kind of doing that same thing. Hey, there's this hidden thing and this thing, it's making you sick. And David said, this was so great. He said to me, Marcella, I should be terrified that there could be even a molecule of arsenic in my food. Maybe play on the rich heritage of arsenic. Like, why do you think arsenic is always the poison of choice for murderers? Because just a tiny bit is enough to kill someone. Even a smaller amount can wreak havoc. He was like, the way you write it, I think, yeah, okay, maybe there's some arsenic in my food. Yeah, maybe it's kind of bad for me, but I just won't eat those foods, right? Now I want to show you, he was basically like, you have to turn this around and make me wake up and be worried about this. And this was a challenge I had because we're being told something's bad for us every single day, and you just start to shut down and you go, well, you can't live in a bubble, the heck with it, right? So of all of the leads I wrote, I had the most fun with this, and I feel like it was the most entertaining. And it turned out that this one is still running today. I've tested against it, but this one is still running today. The other piece of advice that David gave me, which was brilliant, again, this is why you got to get other people to give you feedback, is he said, turn it into a quiz. He goes, Marcella, remember the Publishers Clearinghouse thing? And you would have to do all those quizzes in there? But people probably aren't old enough. They came in the mail. We did all these quizzes. Okay. So he said, make it a quiz. I was like, oh my God, that's genius, right? So which one of these healthy meals is loaded with one of the deadliest poisons in history? I didn't make one of them a Big Mac. That would have been obvious, right? And again, full credit to the fabulous Lori Haller. We got rice and vegetables, right? We've got chicken and peas. Maybe you're worried about the mashed potatoes, but it's pretty healthy. And you got a salad. So let's do a quick quiz. Which one, say salad, chicken, or rice? What do you think is loaded with arsenic here? Salad, chicken, or rice?
All right, we've got a lot of rice and salads.
The rice wins. This was a study that came out that showed there are really high levels of arsenic in brown rice, which meant it was in baby food, which meant babies were having high levels of arsenic, and they actually started recalling some infant rice cereal. Now remember, even though that's shocking and scary, my audience is 60. Their kids are grown. Maybe their grandkids are eating rice cereal, but that's not as compelling. So I'm not going to lead with that, even though I know that, right? So this is rice, right? There's rice, and that turns out to be the dangerous thing. So what I want you to notice here is the difference in tone in this opening and how I did what David told me to do. And in fact, I now call this the David Deutsch death test. And I say, if you're writing about health, especially prevention, because remember, that's the hardest thing to sell, right? I'm saying to you, you'd better get these toxins out of your body or these bad things will happen. And I'm also trying to prove to you that all those symptoms you have, they're really caused by toxins, not arthritis, not Alzheimer's, not whatever. They're all caused by toxins. Okay. But I have to make it sound like a matter of life or death. I want you to turn to your spouse and go, don't touch the rice. Don't eat that rice. Throw it out, right? I want you to want me to FedEx you the supplement tomorrow because you ate rice last night. So this is how it goes, right? These meals all look extremely healthy, don't they? You'd never guess that one of them contains dangerously high levels of one of the most deadly poisons known to man. A poison so lethal, it only takes an amount the size of a pea to kill you. Again, same thing as with the trucks lined around the world. And only micrograms to throw a monkey wrench into virtually every bodily function. This deadly toxin is astonishingly versatile, able to cause damage even at low doses. It's easily absorbed in the stomach and intestines. From there, it can spread out and damage your entire body, including your skin, lungs, liver, kidney, and more. Because this deadly poison has no color or odor, it's almost impossible to detect. Worse, it harms you slowly and insidiously. You get sicker and sicker without raising the typical doctor's suspicions. By the time you or your doctor realizes you've been poisoned, it's too late. This poison is so hard to detect. It was used throughout history to kill off unsuspecting spouses and wealthy relatives. It has been implicated in the death of kings and queens, and best-selling novelist Agatha Christie calls it her murder weapon of choice. In case you haven't guessed by now, I'm talking about arsenic. Can you guys feel the difference in that energy, right? So this became one of my strongest controls. It was also the most fun to write, right? Because when David just said that one thing, like, have fun with the rich history of arsenic, and I find out it was the Victorian woman's weapon of choice to kill off wealthy husbands so they could get their money. It's like, that's a double win in my book. Oh my God. So this by reaching out, by asking someone who came at it with a completely different mindset, I end up with a quiz as an opening. I end up with this sort of Agatha Christie style murder mystery setup so that you're looking at your spouse at dinner and wondering what they slipped into your brown rice. That had a whole new life to this package. And I'll show you real quickly what happened after that. Was someone sent me another article that arsenic is in red wine. I changed almost 3 words at the most, right? And now you see you've got green tea, red wine, and a smoothie. Arsenic's in red wine. I literally only had to change 2 paragraphs, and then that ran for a long time. And the newest one that I tried to beat took everything I knew about what had worked. And that's another good lesson. And we'll pause just in a second for comments. As you're learning, as you're seeing what's working, if you are lucky enough and fortunate enough to have a control run for 12 years, don't learn the same lesson twice, right? So what did I learn about the date thing? I learned that worked really well. What did I learn about the quiz? I learned that worked really well. What did I learn about that sort of nostalgia and fear of what had happened in your childhood? I learned that from Julie. So this year I tried an entirely new package because there had been so much more data that had come out about toxins, right? And this is the headline I did. Can you spot the 5 deadly toxins hidden in this picture? I've got a quiz. This is a nostalgia picture. If you grew up in the 50s, that looks like every schoolroom my mother was in, right? And I've used the date thing. If you went to grade school in the United States between 1928 and 1985, and again, those dates correspond with when lead was in gasoline and paint. Your body may be contaminated with some of the deadliest toxins in history. Here's how to tell if you've been affected and what to do about it. And this is a nostalgia opening. I cringe when I think about it. Back when I was in grade schools, the walls and windowsills were covered in lead paint. Lead gasoline fumes spewed from the school bus. If you opened the door to the teacher's lounge, you were engulfed in a cloud of cigarette smoke. Every school had PCBs. And then I did something else. I talked about how contaminants in schools are still making kids sick today. In fact, in California, there were a group of high school students who got incredibly sick from PCBs because they didn't realize they were in the building, right? They've had to recently remove a whole bunch of water fountains from schools because they were loaded with arsenic. I did this. I talked about, I don't know if you guys did this. How many people played with mercury on your desk? We used to get to play with it in 8th grade. We cut up the little balls and we moved them around. A kid brought just the mercury from a thermometer to school. They closed it down. It was over $2 million, and guys in hazmat suits to clean it up. We played with it in balls on the desk, right? So I took everything I learned for this test. Now, it did not, at first, it crushed the arsenic food one, and then it dropped off immediately, and then the arsenic food one came back up. Sometimes I'm like, all right, so now I'm trying a different headline lead test on this package for probably next month to see if I can, you know, it's a nice problem to have, to not be able to beat your own control. Worse things could happen, right? So I'll still be trying to beat that, the arsenic setup. And I really do think it's that opening. It's just fun while scaring the crap out of you, right? Okay, so let me get rid of that. Now, I'm happy to take questions. I want to make sure you guys know how to get this. So if you go to Titanides, that's the group that I run. Even if you're not a woman, we're going to let everybody have this one. So don't freak out. It's just titanides.com/never-ending-control. I'm going to give you this warning. Don't open this thing on your cell phone. It's 280 pages. Put it on your computer. Open the PDF on your computer. Okay? You get every single control, so you can kind of compare them to each other. And I have to give a big thank you to Lori Haller because I didn't have time to scan these in. So these are her proofs that went to the company right before we did the final print. So there's typos and stuff. Just forgive me because this was the only way I could get you copies because these are tangible ones and I didn't want to try to go find all of the internet versions and put them together. So go there. Download that. Every lesson that I taught you today is also in the introduction. So I give you a breakdown of the lessons, the same ones that I taught you today. So you can go back through in each of these and just go over it and then just keep it, like I said, as ways to brainstorm, to create, to come up with new content. Okay, I think we're down to about 5 minutes, but I'm happy to hang out and answer any questions that we have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marcella. First of all, Laurent said, just brown rice, OMG.
No, right? I know, and brown rice is worse than white rice because it's evidently in the kernel part, and the brown rice is the thing I was eating because I thought it was healthy.
Exactly.
And that was another aha moment. I was like, oh my God, I've been eating tons of brown rice and vegetables.
And here's a question for you. Did you purposely lay out the copy to force the page turn?
Yes. Yes. If you can, you want a cliffhanger. If you can't do a real cliffhanger, you want to at least cut off. This is print, right? You want to cut off the sentence. You can also do it if you're online. When these would show up, it would look like a free article in an email, and you would open the email and you would start reading. And when it got to the cliffhanger, it would be that blue thing, you know, see more or more. And you would click that to read the rest of the article, and that would take you to the landing page. It's the reason why, you know, I'm still watching episode, I don't even know what, of Outlander, right? Because it's always on a cliffhanger, or Grey's Anatomy, or I got to find out if the guy's going to live, right? So yeah, make them turn the page, or if it's online, make them go from the online start of the article to your landing page. That's going to have the whole thing in your checkout cart.
Thank you, Marcella. And someone was just wondering what newsletter you were just showing.
Oh, so what I'm showing is the faux issue. So let's bring one up. So this is actually a promotion designed to look like a paid newsletter. So in our industry, we call that a faux issue, F-A-U-X. Am I spelling that right? A faux issue. Mm-hmm. I've deliberately made this look like editorial content so you will read it. Think of In the online world, it's those box ads. Like if you're on a news site and there's those little box ads at the bottom and they look like a news story with a headline in the first paragraph, and you click on it and you realize it wasn't a news story at all. It took you right to a sponsored landing page, right? So when you do this in the mail, the way that you do that is I get what I think is a health newsletter from a doctor. I open it and start to read it, and it's not until I get to probably here that I realize that they're going to sell me something, because I've given you a ton of information about the problem and the concern. And then right here is where I'm going to say, the good news is there's a solution. That makes sense?
Great. I think it does. The last comment you have in here, Rick was just saying that Consumer Report discusses that arsenic is also found in apple juice and naturally in groundwater.
So I thought about the apple juice, but that would be directed to a younger audience, right? Because that's more of a kid thing. Although I will tell you, my grandmother always had a glass of apple juice. I think it was for her digestion. So I want to pick something that the most amount of people in my demographic are going to be eating, right? And I liked the red wine because I knew they were probably drinking wine, right? That was a safer bet. And the groundwater one comes up in this package because I talk about the one of the 5 hidden toxins is the water fountain. And you're right. There is a crisis of arsenic in groundwater, and some of it is just organic in the groundwater, and some we've caused ourselves. So I use that in this one. We good? We got any more?
I believe so. Someone was saying they were having a bit of trouble with the download link, but I just put it on your page. It looks like you have to put your name in there, and then it's sent to your inbox. So
yes,
and
because
your
it's
email.
280 pages, people.
Yes.
And if you don't want to be on the list, you can get on the list, get it, and get off the list. I'm not going to handcuff you to the list, but it's 280 pages. So yes, you got to download it. It'll come as a link and you can download it.
And it's worth it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't do a good job of, I believe that Carlene sells hers for either $49 or $59 a piece. I think Kim Schwalm sells hers for $49 or $59 a piece, right? I am giving you 12 different controls here. This is like swipe file gold, right? So usually these are huge bonuses, right, that you give when someone joins something. But as a way of saying thank you to AWAI, we are just giving this, the Titanites are giving this to you as our gift.
And as your mothers have told all of you, I don't care how old you are on this call, a nice little thank you will be expected. You have Marcella's email. No, but in truth, what she's giving you is, again, additional resources for your own swipe file. And those of you who are just starting out may not know the value of swipe files yet, but just as Marcella said at the beginning, and as we say in the very beginning of the very first copywriting program, you study the masters and you study what's working. So you study your controls, and you guys will find value.
Hand copying Paris Lampropolis's and David Deutsch's control and the AWAI book. Denise, what's the book? It's the very first thing we get. It used to be a blue book, but now it's online.
You mean
the one that has the
Hall of Fame?
Yes. So I hand copied the 2 men letter. I can still remember those letters. There's one about the environment in there that's really good. That's the first thing I did, was hand copy those letters. And then I started on Paris's when I was working with Paris. And then I went to David's. I've done Henry Bingham's. When I was at Money Map, I did Mike Ward's. I mean, I have, without flipping you off, I have copied enough that you can probably see my
callus.
My callus right there. My callus right there.
Your writer's callus.
Yes, having a swipe file. My husband has decided to come file things now that we're finishing up our call.
It's cocktail time.
It's cocktail, right? He's
well, actually, swipe files are very, very useful. And Fran, what does Mr. Oren say? It looks pretty funny in here. Oh, yeah. He said, Marcella, the control you talked about in the AWAI method has had me pulling on my shirt and checking my posture for weeks now.
Yes, right. Someone said to me once, why do you take 30 supplements? And I said, because I wrote about all of them. Sold myself. That's a really good sign, right? So you get all kinds of benefits when you hand copy. But I would say, especially because Paris, and I give him lots of credit, that Paris was my copy chief on this, and David was my copy chief for some of them. I actually switched back and forth, which was good, and mixed things up. If you study the connections between ideas, between paragraphs, the transitions, that is one of the best things you could learn from this swipe file that I've given you, because it's one of the hardest things, right? You've got idea A and idea B, and you've got to get them through there. And if you don't get those transitions right, you're going to lose them, right? Especially this is true in a VSL, right? All those places where you can lose them, right? So you have to be super aware of those. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons I learned from both of those, is to not have any exits, no exit. So you might read this a couple of times and notice how you're just led from sentence to sentence to paragraph to paragraph to idea, and there's no jarring place where you're going to go, what? Right? And leave. And that is a critical thing when writing long form sales copy like this, right? Probably more so than short, I would almost say. If you're in long form copy, I got to hold your attention for 60 minutes. That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
This was delightful. Thank you for having me here to do this. I really had a lot of fun today. I've forgotten half of these stories from these promos, so this is great. Thank you.
Anything else, Fran, in the queue?
Not that I can see, just a lot of thank yous for Marcella.
Oh, that is really sweet. I am just really grateful for the opportunity, especially that you guys have given me. I got my start at AWAI, and Circle of Success did not exist at the time. So I was Founder Circle. Do you remember that, Denise?
Yes,
I was
indeed.
Founder Circle. And I still am, right? I love the classes. I love the people that I teach with. I love the community. And every connection that I've made started here. I met Paris because of you guys. I met David because of you guys, right? That was from the very first boot camp I went to. All roads lead back to AWAI in my book. So you guys are in a great place, and you have each other, which, let's face it, in these days is huge. To have a community that wants you to succeed is huge, right? Yeah. And we all need community right now.
Yes. Well, thank you for not only being part of it, Marcella, but for also creating it for us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It was wonderful to see you all participate. Very happy to see so many writers.
Don't eat any brown rice. Drink any red wine. I've ruined everything for you, right? Don't touch receipts. Don't touch slick receipts. All right, guys. Take care.
All right. Bye, Marcella.
Bye, guys.